It was a Thursday night, one of those crisp early autumn evenings when the air smells like wood smoke and the streets hum with chatter. I was standing in line at the small grocery store on Main Street when I overheard two women behind me whispering. They were talking about the big play at the Old Town Theater. At first, I paid no mind, until I heard my husband's name. They said he had been seen there last night, dressed sharp in the navy suit I'd ironed just 2 days ago, with a woman who wasn't his wife. My heart didn't sink immediately, it froze. I turned slowly and recognized the women. They lived just 2 houses down. They didn't see me, but their voices carried enough for me to catch every word. They described her, tall, blonde, wearing that red silk scarf I'd seen draped over our neighbor Rachel's shoulders just last week. Rachel, 34, single, with a habit of leaning a little too close to my husband whenever she bumped into us at the mailbox. My stomach twisted. My mind tried to reason it away. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe the lights in the theater had played tricks. But then, one of them mentioned they'd seen him put his hand on the small of her back, guiding her inside like they were on a date. I could barely finish paying for my groceries. My hands shook as I loaded the bags into the trunk. On the drive home, every memory of Rachel waving from her porch, every smirk my husband had given when she complimented him on his lawn work, every awkward laugh I'd brushed off, suddenly it all clicked into something ugly. When I got home, I walked through our kitchen in a haze. The house smelled of the roast chicken I'd put in the slow cooker that morning. It should have felt like comfort. Instead, it felt like mockery. My husband wasn't home yet. He'd said he had an extra meeting at work tonight. My hands clenched into fists so tight, my nails dug crescents into my palms. I went into the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed we'd shared for 10 years, and stared at the wedding photo on the nightstand. The man in that picture had promised to protect me, to honor me. But now I couldn't shake the image of him holding open the theater door for Rachel. It was like my brain kept replaying it, even though I hadn't seen it myself. The gossip was enough to etch the betrayal into my mind. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I told myself I needed proof. But the rage, it was already rising in my chest. Thick and hot. That's when I made a decision. If my husband wanted to parade around town with another woman, I would make sure the entire town saw exactly what kind of man he was. Not in whispers, not in backroom gossip. In broad daylight where no one could pretend they didn't know. And the sign, yes, the sign was going to make sure no one ever forgot. But first, I had to be absolutely certain it was true, and the way I found out left me shaking so hard I could barely breathe. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding in my chest, as if my body knew before my mind remembered. The coffee tasted bitter. My hands kept tightening around the mug. He came into the kitchen, fresh from the shower, humming a tune I didn't recognize. That bothered me, the lightness in his step, the way he didn't look at me long enough to notice I'd barely slept. "Morning," he said, kissing the top of my head in a way that felt rehearsed. "Got another late night tonight?" "Don't wait up." It wasn't what he said. It was the way he said it. No pause, no searching my face to see if I'd question it. Just smooth. Practiced. My mind screamed that this was not the first time. I decided not to confront him then. That would give him room to spin excuses. Instead, I pulled out my phone the moment he left and called my cousin Tom. Tom worked part-time at the theater, handling lighting and backstage setups. He owed me a favor. "Tom," I said, keeping my voice steady, "do you remember who was at the show 2 nights ago? I heard something, and I need to know if you saw him there." Tom hesitated just a second too long. "Yeah," he finally said. "He was there, and, he wasn't alone." My throat felt tight. "Was it Rachel?" Another pause. "I'm sorry, Anna. I didn't want to be the one to tell you, but yeah, they were sitting close, laughing. She had her hand on his arm most of the night." I hung up and stared at the wall. My knees felt weak. It was one thing to hear gossip. It was another to have it confirmed by someone I trusted. The air in the kitchen seemed thinner, like I couldn't pull enough into my lungs. That's when the idea for the sign stopped being just a petty fantasy and became my mission. If they wanted to behave like a couple, then they could be the couple everyone talked about. For the wrong reasons. I didn't want to just confront him in private. I wanted the whole town to see him for what he was. I spent the afternoon at my friend Marlene's print shop. She didn't ask questions when I gave her the words I wanted in bold black letters. She just raised her eyebrows and said, "You sure about this?" "Dead sure," I said. "Make it big enough to be read from across Main Street." By the time the sun began to set, I was driving home with the sign in the trunk, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly the skin on my knuckles had gone pale. My heart was racing, not from fear but from the sharp edge of adrenaline. I was ready to put it where everyone could see. But just as I turned onto our street, I saw something that made me slam on the brakes. My husband's car was in the driveway, and so was Rachel's. And when I walked up to the window to see what they were doing, the sight inside nearly made me drop the sign right there in the yard. My name is Anna Carter. I'm 36 years old, and for most of my adult life, people have described me as the dependable one. I grew up in the same town, in a small yellow house at the edge of a cornfield. My parents taught me that a good life comes from hard work, honesty, and treating people with kindness. I believed that, maybe too much. I met my husband Mark when I was 24. He was charming in a way that felt safe, not flashy, not overbearing, just warm and steady. Or so I thought. We married after 2 years of dating, in a small ceremony in my parents' backyard. I wore my mother's lace veil and the town's bakery made our cake. It was simple, but it felt perfect. I left my job at the local bank when we decided to start a family. But life didn't go according to plan. 2 miscarriages later, I was quietly labeled by the town as the woman who couldn't have children. People didn't say it outright, but I could see it in their eyes. Mark told me it didn't matter, that we could still have a beautiful life together. I clung to those words like a life raft. Without kids to care for, I poured myself into our home. I cooked from scratch, kept the garden lush, and made sure Mark had everything he needed to succeed in his job at the insurance office. My friends would sometimes tease me for being old-fashioned, but I didn't mind. I believed in being a partner, in holding up my end of the marriage. Over the years, I began to notice small shifts in Mark. He became more guarded with his phone, took longer to get ready in the mornings, and had a new cologne I hadn't bought him. I told myself he was just trying to keep things fresh. Maybe he was stressed. I never thought to question his loyalty until Rachel moved in next door. Rachel was everything I wasn't. Effortlessly glamorous, with perfect hair and a laugh that made men turn their heads. She wore dresses that floated in the breeze and seemed allergic to modesty. She also had a knack for showing up whenever Mark was outside, whether he was mowing the lawn or taking out the trash. I told myself it was nothing. I had to believe that my marriage was stronger than a neighbor's flirtation. But deep down, I felt the slow creep of insecurity. I began to notice Mark watching her a second too long. He'd brush off my questions, say I was overthinking. It wasn't until that Thursday night, when the whispers reached my ears in the grocery store, that the last thread of my denial snapped. And now, with the sign in my trunk and the truth staring me in the face, I was no longer the woman who stayed quiet to keep the peace. But before I put that sign where everyone could see, I had to face what I saw in my own living room, and it wasn't what I expected. When I stepped onto the porch that evening, the sign still hidden in the trunk, I could see through the living room window. Mark and Rachel were sitting close on the couch, but they weren't touching. She had a folder in her lap, and he was pointing to something inside. I stood there for a moment, my breath caught halfway in my throat. It almost looked professional. But that didn't erase the nights he'd lied about where he was. It didn't erase the confirmed story from Tom. I stayed hidden, watching as Rachel laughed at something he said. The sound was muffled through the glass, but I recognized it. The same laugh she used when she leaned over our fence to talk to him. I walked inside without knocking. Mark jumped up like I'd caught him stealing. Rachel's eyes went wide, her perfect smile freezing. "Oh, Anna," she said, too sweet. "We were just going over some insurance forms. Mark was helping me." I cut her off. "At the theater the other night?" My voice was sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. Mark started to speak, but I held up a hand. "Save it. I'm not interested in your stories. I just want you to know that I'm done pretending." Rachel looked down at her folder, suddenly fascinated by the papers. Mark's face tightened, but he didn't deny it. That silence told me more than words could. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply turned around, walked back to my car, and sat in the driver's seat for a long time. My hands were steady now. My mind was clear. I had spent years being the quiet wife, the supportive partner. Years believing that loyalty and love were enough to keep a man faithful. But as I stared at the sign in the trunk, I realized something. The person I used to be would have begged for an explanation. She would have given him a chance to twist the truth. That Anna was gone. I grew up believing that if you followed the rules, worked hard, loved deeply, kept your vows, life would protect you from the worst kinds of pain. But life isn't fair. It's not even polite. It will knock you flat, and then it will kick you while you're down. What you do next, that's what defines you. That night, I parked the car in the garage, leaving the sign inside. Not because I had second thoughts, but because I knew I needed to plan this carefully. If I was going to put my marriage, and his betrayal, on public display, it had to be done in a way that no one could twist into gossip or speculation. The truth was about to come out, and when it did, there would be no going back. What I didn't know then was that the perfect opportunity to reveal it would come sooner, and more publicly, than I ever imagined. Our town, Millbrook, isn't the kind of place where secrets stay hidden for long. It's a patchwork of old brick buildings, white picket fences, and streets lined with maple trees that blaze gold and red in the fall. We have one grocery store, one gas station, and a single stoplight in the middle of Main Street. Everyone knows everyone's business, or thinks they do. The theater sits right in the center of town, its vintage marquee glowing at night like a beacon. It's not just a place for plays. It's where the community gathers for fundraisers, concerts, and the annual charity gala. That gala was coming up in just 2 weeks, and it was all anyone could talk about. The wealthier families would compete to wear the most stunning outfits, and the local paper would print photos of the best-dressed couples. Mark had already mentioned the gala months ago, saying it was great for networking. I'd assumed we'd go together like we always had, but after what I'd learned, the thought of standing beside him in front of the whole town made my skin crawl. The Carter house, our house, sits 2 streets away from the theater. It's a white 2-story with green shutters and a wraparound porch, the kind of place people stop to admire in the spring when the garden's in full bloom. I used to take pride in that, but now it felt like a stage set, perfect on the outside, hollow on the inside. Inside, every room told the story of our life together. The framed photos in the hallway, the worn spot on the couch where Mark always sat, the dent in the kitchen table from when we'd tried to assemble it ourselves. They used to make me feel safe, but now they felt like props in a play I didn't sign up for. The sign in my garage was bold and impossible to ignore. I'd gone with heavy white poster board and thick black lettering so it could be read from across the street. It said exactly what I wanted it to, with no room for doubt or denial. Every time I walked past it, my pulse quickened. I imagined it hanging in the busiest part of town, right where Mark couldn't avoid seeing it. But the gala, that was the stage I hadn't considered until now. The whole town would be there. Rachel would be there. And if I timed it right, I could make sure that my message reached every set of eyes in that theater. The idea was risky. Public humiliation isn't something you can undo. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like the only way to make him feel even a fraction of the shame he'd given me. What I didn't realize was that fate was already arranging the perfect moment. And it would take place under those same theater lights where his betrayal began. In Millbrook, the gala isn't just a party. It's the social event of the year. It's held inside the theater's grand hall, a room lined with tall velvet curtains, crystal chandeliers, and rows of polished wooden seats that smell faintly of cedar and history. The entire front lobby is transformed for the occasion, filled with tables draped in white linens, trays of champagne flutes, and arrangements of white roses that seem to glow under the lights. For as long as I can remember, the gala has been where reputations are made and sometimes destroyed. It's where couples announce engagements, businesses land big contracts, and, quietly, rumors get their first public test. People don't say much outright, but a glance, A whisper or a raised eyebrow can carry enough weight to ripple through the whole town by morning. The week before the gala, I watched from my kitchen window as Rachel's porch filled with boxes from online boutiques. Every day, a new package arrived: dresses, shoes, jewelry. She didn't try to hide it either. She'd open them right on her porch, holding up each piece for the neighborhood to see, her smile smug and satisfied. Mark's behavior didn't change much, at least not outwardly. He still kissed me on the forehead before leaving for work, still asked if I needed anything from the store. But there was a tightness in his smile now, like he was guarding something. I caught him checking his watch more often, and twice I heard him speaking in a low voice on the phone, ending the call abruptly when I walked into the room. Meanwhile, the sign in my garage became both a comfort and a temptation. I'd run my fingers over the bold letters, imagining the gasps, the murmurs, the way people would glance at Mark when they read it. I knew that if I unveiled it at the gala, there would be no going back. He'd be exposed not just to me, but to everyone whose opinion he cared about. The night before the gala, I drove past the theater. Workers were inside, hanging lights and arranging tables. Through the tall glass doors, I could see the red carpet being rolled out across the entrance. It struck me that this was the same place where Rachel and Mark had walked in together, laughing, under that glowing marquee. I sat in my car for a long time staring at that doorway. I could almost hear the sound of clinking glasses, the music from the live band, the hum of conversation. And over it all, I could picture the moment my sign appeared, loud without making a sound. What I didn't know then was that the gala wouldn't just be my stage, it would be the moment the entire town chose a side. Mark Carter wasn't always the man people would soon whisper about. When I met him, he was the kind of man who opened doors, remembered anniversaries, and called me just to hear my voice. He worked hard, dressed neatly, and carried himself with quiet confidence. People trusted him. Neighbors came to him for advice, and his boss often relied on him for important clients. But somewhere along the line, that man faded. It didn't happen overnight. It was subtle at first, coming home later than usual, claiming it was just paperwork keeping him, spending a little more time on his appearance before leaving the house, taking phone calls outside instead of at the kitchen table. I told myself it was stress, maybe ambition. I didn't see it for what it was, a man growing bolder in his lies. Mark had always liked attention. He thrived on compliments, whether from coworkers, friends, or strangers. Rachel fed that need like no one else. She didn't just notice his new tie, she'd touch it, smooth it down, lean in close enough for her perfume to linger. She didn't just laugh at his jokes, she threw her head back like he was the most fascinating man she'd ever met. I could see the effect it had on him, even before I knew the extent of it. Rachel herself was a master at slipping into people's lives. She worked part-time at a boutique in the next town, but most days she seemed to be at home, tending her rose bushes and sundresses that looked more suited for cocktail parties. She'd bring over extra cookies or pies, always catching Mark in the driveway so they could chat without me around. If I happened to step outside, she'd flash me that syrupy smile that never quite reached her eyes. I tried to like her. I told myself she was just being friendly, that maybe she was lonely. But the way she lingered near Mark, the way her gaze slid over me like I was invisible, it was impossible to ignore. The theater outing was just the final straw. It wasn't just that they went together, it was that they did it so openly. In Millbrook, you can't walk into the theater with someone without it being noticed. And they didn't just go in. They sat close, laughed together, and left side by side. Tom told me he'd seen them pause under the marquee, talking in that intimate way that makes two people look like they're in their own world. Mark might have thought he was being discreet, but the truth is, he underestimated me. He thought I'd look the other way, like I always had. What he didn't know was that the woman he married had finally run out of patience, and that Rachel was about to find herself in the middle of a storm she couldn't control. If Mark was the kind of man who liked to hide his missteps behind charm, Rachel was the kind of woman who didn't see the need to hide at all. She had a way of acting like she owned any space she walked into. Her chin slightly lifted, her smile perfectly timed, her voice smooth and just loud enough to carry. She wasn't born in Millbrook. She'd moved here from the city less than a year ago, claiming she wanted a slower pace of life. But she carried herself like she was still on a runway, even when she was at the grocery store. She joined the neighborhood book club, but never read the books. Instead, she used the meetings to talk about her adventures in the city, always slipping in little comments about how refreshing it was to be somewhere so small and safe. To most people, she seemed harmless. Flirtatious, maybe, but harmless. To me, she was a slow leak in the hull of my marriage, letting in trouble drop by drop. The more I watched her, the more I realized she knew exactly what she was doing. Mark changed even more after she arrived. He started quoting things she'd said, laughing at jokes that didn't sound like his. He developed a taste for wine he'd never liked before, started wearing shirts in colors Rachel once told him looked sharp. These weren't coincidences, they were pieces of him shifting toward her orbit. The worst part? She didn't even have to work hard for it. She could lean on a fence post, wearing sunglasses and sipping iced tea, and Mark would find an excuse to walk over. She'd tilt her head just so, touch his arm lightly, and I could see his chest puff up like a boy trying to impress his first crush. I'm not naive. I know that affairs, emotional or otherwise, rarely happen in a vacuum. There were cracks in our marriage that I hadn't wanted to face. But Rachel didn't just find those cracks, she pried them wider. And Mark let her. In a town like Millbrook, you'd think fear of judgment would keep people in line. But the truth is, some people crave the thrill of being noticed, of being talked about. Mark liked the admiration, Rachel liked the power. Together, they created a spectacle that was as public as it was destructive. I could have confronted her directly. I could have told her to stay away from my husband, but I knew that would only feed her sense of victory. No, I had something else in mind, something that would hit both of them where it hurt most. And the perfect chance to deliver that blow was approaching fast, with the entire town ready to watch. The night of the gala arrived with a crisp chill in the air, the kind that makes the stars look sharper. Millbrook's theater glowed against the dark sky, its marquee spelling out the event in gold letters. Cars lined Main Street, and the sound of laughter and footsteps echoed as people made their way inside. I'd chosen my dress carefully, not the most glamorous in the room, but one that made me feel steady and unshakable. A deep navy gown, simple pearl earrings, and my hair pinned back. I didn't want to look like I was competing. I wanted to look like I belonged, even if my heart was pounding. Mark had told me he'd meet me there because he had work to finish. I didn't argue. That was fine. I wanted my own entrance. I parked 2 streets away and took a slow walk toward the theater, passing shop windows that reflected the warm glow of the gala. In my hand was a folded sheet of paper, a smaller version of the sign I'd made. The big one was still in my car, waiting for the right moment. As I stepped into the theater lobby, I felt the weight of eyes on me. Some people smiled warmly, others offered polite nods, and a few glanced away too quickly. In Millbrook, those glances mean they've heard something but don't know if they should mention it. The gala was in full swing. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne, a jazz trio played softly near the stage, and couples posed for photos under the grand chandelier. I scanned the room and found Mark near the far end, standing with a small group. Rachel was there, in a dress the color of molten gold, her hair in perfect waves. She had her hand on his arm like she'd earned the right. It was almost laughable, how public they were, how unafraid. People were already whispering. I saw heads tilt, eyes dart between the two of them, but no one said anything outright. That's how Millbrook worked, judgment disguised as politeness. Then, as if the night wanted to push me further, the MC stepped onto the stage to welcome everyone. He announced the evening's sponsors, thanked the local businesses, and then invited couples to join him for the first dance tradition. Mark took Rachel's hand without hesitation. That was it. My decision was made. I walked out of the theater, my heels clicking against the sidewalk. I went straight to my car, popped the trunk, and lifted the sign. The cool night air stung my cheeks, but adrenaline kept me warm. When I returned to the theater's entrance, I didn't go inside. I found the perfect spot, right against the main glass doors where every person leaving or entering would have to see it. And as I placed it there, the first few people who saw it stopped in their tracks, their eyes widening. The sign was big enough to command attention, but simple enough to leave no room for doubt. In bold black letters it read, "My husband, Mark Carter, took our neighbor Rachel to the show while I was home. Ask him why." It wasn't vulgar. It wasn't emotional. It was just truth. Cold and unvarnished. That's what made it sting more. I stepped back to admire my work, my heart hammering against my ribs. The first couple to see it froze mid-step, their eyes darting toward the ballroom inside, then back to me. The woman's mouth parted like she wanted to speak, but instead, she pulled her husband along and disappeared inside. Within minutes, small knots of people began forming near the entrance. They whispered, glanced toward the glass doors, and some even pulled out their phones. I knew those pictures would be online before the night was over. I didn't stay hidden. I stood right there, chin up, meeting every pair of eyes that looked my way. A few people avoided me entirely. Others gave me a nod of quiet approval. One older woman, Mrs. Ellis, actually took my hand and gave it a squeeze before walking past. It didn't take long for the ripple to reach inside. Through the glass, I saw someone tug on Mark's sleeve. He followed them toward the door, confusion on his face. But the moment he stepped outside and saw me standing next to the sign, the color drained from his cheeks. "What the hell is this, Anna?" he hissed, his voice low but sharp. I didn't move. "It's the truth. Don't like it? Should have thought about that before you made it true." Rachel appeared behind him, her golden dress catching the light like some cruel joke. She tried to speak, but I held up a hand. "You don't get to say a word to me." By now, people were gathering openly, some stepping outside just to read the sign themselves. I could hear the hum of conversations building, questions, shock, and a few muffled laughs from those who'd never liked Mark to begin with. Mark's jaw worked, but he didn't say another word. He grabbed Rachel's arm and tried to lead her away, but she pulled back, her eyes scanning the crowd. For the first time, I saw her confidence falter. And that's when I realized the sign hadn't just exposed them, it had shifted the power in the room completely into my hands. When I finally walked away from the theater that night, the air felt colder than before. My heels clicked against the empty sidewalk, each step echoing in my head like a reminder of what I'd just done. The sign was still there, propped against the glass doors, but the crowd had thinned. Inside, the music had started again, though it sounded muted, distant, like it was coming from another world. I should have felt victorious. For weeks I'd imagined that moment. Mark's face paling, Rachel's composure cracking, the whispers swirling like wildfire. And yet all I felt was hollow. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking. The adrenaline that had kept me steady all evening was draining out of me, leaving behind a cold, heavy weight in my chest. I sat in the driver's seat with the door still open, my breath clouding in the night air, and wondered if I'd just destroyed my own life in the process of exposing theirs. When I got home, the house felt different, quieter, emptier, like it knew something had shifted. I locked the door, kicked off my shoes, and sank onto the couch. The silence pressed in on me. I thought about the people at the gala, the way they'd looked at me, some with pity, some with respect, some with thinly veiled judgment. That's the thing about small towns. People don't forget. My sign would be the talk of Millbrook for months, maybe years. And while Mark deserved every bit of shame that came his way, I knew my own name would be in their mouths just as often. I told myself I didn't care. But as the hours passed and the adrenaline faded completely, the doubts began creeping in. Had I gone too far? Would this make it harder to start over? Would I ever be able to walk into the grocery store without feeling the weight of a dozen curious stares? At some point, I realized I was crying. Not loud, dramatic sobs, just a steady stream of tears I couldn't stop. My hands curled into the blanket on my lap like I was holding on for dear life. I wasn't just mourning my marriage, I was mourning the version of myself that had believed it would last. The clock read 2:14 a.m. when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Just 4 words. "You did the right thing." I stared at it for a long time, my mind running through who it could be. A friend? A stranger? Someone who'd seen the sign and wanted to offer support? Whoever it was, I didn't know yet that their message would lead to a truth even bigger than Mark's betrayal. I didn't reply to the text right away. My mind was too foggy, my emotions too raw. Instead, I placed the phone face down on the coffee table and tried to focus on my breathing. In, out, steady, like my therapist had taught me years ago after my first miscarriage. But the memories kept slipping in. Mark's hand on Rachel's arm, the sound of laughter behind glass, the look on his face when he saw the sign. Each one hit like a fresh bruise. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a pounding headache. The house was silent. Mark hadn't come home, and I didn't expect him to. Part of me hoped he would, just so I could slam the door in his face. Another part dreaded the confrontation entirely. I made coffee but couldn't bring myself to drink it. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the mug until the steam faded away. My phone buzzed again, another text from the same unknown number. This time it read, "Meet me at the diner at noon. I have something you need to see." Curiosity tangled with caution. I thought about ignoring it, but the words, "something you need to see," lodged in my mind like a splinter. By 11:45, I found myself pulling into the diner's parking lot. Inside, the familiar smell of frying bacon and brewed coffee wrapped around me. The place was half full. Farmers in worn jackets, a couple of teenagers with earbuds, and a waitress refilling cups. I scanned the booths until I spotted a woman in her 40s with short brown hair, a leather satchel at her side. She waved me over. "You don't know me," she began as I slid into the seat across from her. "Name's Linda. I used to work with Mark." My guard went up instantly. And I know he's been lying to you for a lot longer than you think," she said, pulling an envelope from her bag. "I saw your sign last night. Thought you deserved the rest of the truth." She slid the envelope across the table. Inside were photos. Mark and Rachel at the theater, at a cafe in the next town, even in front of a hotel I didn't recognize. Dates and times were scrawled in the corner of each. My stomach lurched. This wasn't just one night. This was months, maybe more. Linda leaned in. "You didn't just catch him once, Anna. You've been living with a man who's been making a fool of you for nearly a year." The diner's noise faded into a dull hum. My hands trembled as I set the photos down. I thought the sign had been my breaking point. But this was different. This was the full shattering of everything I thought I knew. And as I stared at those photos, I realized that my public humiliation had only just begun. Unless I found a way to take control. Again. I sat there in the diner, the photos spread out in front of me, like the pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. My coffee sat untouched, cooling in the cup. Linda watched me quietly, as if giving me space to let the weight of it all sink in. Finally, she spoke again. "There's something else you need to know. And it's going to change the way you see all of this." I braced myself. "Go on." She lowered her voice. "Mark isn't just cheating on you. He's been using Rachel to get information he's selling to one of the competing insurance firms in the city." The words didn't land right away. "What are you talking about?" Linda pulled out another envelope, this one thicker. Inside were printed emails, bank statements, and a few grainy screenshots from security footage. "I found these after I left the company. He's been leaking client data, policy numbers, private financial info. Rachel's helping him make the connections. That's why they've been seen in so many different places. They're meeting with buyers." I stared at the papers, my mind struggling to catch up. "You're saying this is illegal?" "Oh, it's beyond illegal," Linda said, her expression grim. "If the right people see this, he's facing prison time. And Rachel, she's just as involved. She's not some innocent mistress. She's his partner in crime." The room seemed to tilt slightly, like I was on unsteady ground. All this time I'd thought their betrayal was personal. But it was bigger, darker. They weren't just breaking vows, they were breaking laws. Linda leaned closer. "You could take this to the police right now. But if you want to play it smart, you could use it. Leverage. You hold this over them and they'll have no choice but to back down from whatever they're planning next." I didn't answer right away. My first instinct was to march straight to the sheriff's office. But another thought was forming, one that made my pulse quicken. If I timed it right, if I let this truth out at the perfect moment, I could do more than just expose them. I could end them. I gathered the photos and documents, tucking them back into the envelope. My hands were steady now. For the first time in days, I felt something close to control. What I didn't know yet was that the chance to use this information would come sooner than I could have planned, and it would happen in front of the very people who had witnessed my humiliation. When I left the diner, the afternoon sun was already dipping low, casting long shadows across Main Street. The envelope felt heavy in my purse, like it was radiating heat. Every step toward my car seemed deliberate, my mind replaying Linda's words over and over. Mark wasn't just a cheating husband, he was a criminal. And Rachel wasn't just a willing accomplice, she was a strategist. The two of them had been building this scheme right under my nose, using the trust of this town as their camouflage. As I drove home, my phone buzzed with a new message, this time from Mark. "We need to talk. Tonight. No apology, no explanation, just an order, as if I was still the obedient wife he could summon at will." I didn't reply. Instead, I pulled into my driveway and went straight to the garage. The big sign from the gala was still leaning against the wall, but now it felt almost small compared to what I held in my purse. I realized I had something far more powerful than public embarrassment. I had the kind of truth that could destroy them legally, financially, socially. I sat at my kitchen table and began to think like them. How would they react if I showed my hand too soon? They'd deny it, hide evidence, twist the story until I looked like the bitter wife making up lies. But if I waited, if I caught them in front of the right people, with proof ready to fall into the right hands, they'd have nowhere to run. The timing had to be perfect. And then it hit me. The town council meeting was in 3 days. It was one of the few events that drew not just the local leaders, but reporters from the county paper. Mark would be there, as he always was, networking, shaking hands. And Rachel? She never missed a chance to be seen in important company. I could picture it now, the moment their names and faces were linked, not just to an affair, but to a scandal that could land them in handcuffs. The whispers from the gala would seem like child's play compared to the headlines this would make. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange calm settle over me. This wasn't revenge anymore, it was justice. And I wasn't just doing it for me. I was doing it for every person they'd lied to, cheated, or exploited. 3 days. That's all I had to turn my pain into their downfall, and I intended to use every single hour. The morning after I decided on my plan, I woke up earlier than usual. The first thing I felt was a steady hum in my chest. Not dread, not fear, but focus. For the first time since the gala, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I started with myself. The woman who'd been humiliated in front of her town was gone. I wasn't going to walk into that council meeting looking like someone who had been broken. I was going to walk in looking like someone who could command a room. I booked an appointment at the best salon 2 towns over, far enough that I wouldn't bump into anyone from Millbrook. My hair had always been kept simple, practical. That day, I let the stylist shape it into something sharper, more deliberate. Layers that framed my face, a deep chestnut tone that caught the light. From there, I stopped by a boutique I'd never dared to enter before. The saleswoman, a tall woman with silver hair and an effortless air of authority, listened quietly as I explained I needed something powerful. She brought out a fitted charcoal suit, the kind with clean lines and a jacket that hit just right at the waist. I paired it with black heels, not too high, but enough to give me a sense of lift with every step. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My posture was different. My eyes looked clearer. I thought about how Mark used to say I looked prettiest in soft colors. I smiled at the reflection. There was nothing soft about me now. At home, I laid out the evidence from Linda, organizing it into a neat folder with tabs. Photos, documents, dates, everything was in order. I added a small USB drive with the digital files, just in case. I wanted to make it impossible for anyone to dismiss the truth. For the rest of the day, I rehearsed in my mind. Not a speech, this wasn't going to be a performance. It was going to be a simple, unshakable statement of facts. I didn't need to embellish. Their actions were damning enough. That evening, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror as I passed. I stopped, looking at the way my shoulders squared naturally now, the way my chin lifted. I thought about the woman who had stood outside the theater clutching a sign, hoping for some sense of justice. She'd been brave, but she'd still been bleeding. This woman, the one in the mirror, wasn't bleeding anymore. She was hunting, and in 3 days, the prey wouldn't even see her coming. The next 2 days became a quiet storm of preparation. I didn't announce anything, didn't post on social media, didn't even mention the council meeting to my closest friends. Silence was my advantage. The fewer people who knew, the harder it would be for word to reach Mark or Rachel. On the second day, I drove to the county courthouse to speak with an attorney recommended by a friend from years back. I told her everything, not just about the affair, but about the documents, the bank records, the meetings. She listened without interrupting, her pen moving steadily across a legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "Anna, you're holding a grenade. If what you've shown me is real, and it looks very real, this could take them both down hard. Criminal charges, asset freezes, the works." Her words didn't scare me. They steadied me. She advised me on how to present the information without compromising its legal weight. She also promised that if I wanted, she could have a formal complaint ready to file within 24 hours of the meeting. By the time I got home, I felt like my plan had gone from an idea to an operation. I printed extra copies of the evidence, placed them in sealed envelopes, and labeled each one with the name of a council member or reporter who would be at the meeting. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. My dreams weren't clouded with images of Mark and Rachel anymore. Instead, I saw the moment their faces would fall, the silence that would follow when their crimes were laid bare in a room full of people who'd once smiled at them. On the morning of the meeting, I dressed with precision. The charcoal suit, the black heels, the sharp hairstyle, it all came together like armor. I applied makeup with a steady hand, not to hide anything, but to sharpen every line of my face. When I looked in the mirror, there was no doubt. I was ready. As I locked the front door and stepped into the crisp morning air, I felt an unfamiliar but welcome sensation: control. For too long, I'd been reacting to their moves. Now, every step I took was mine. I slid into my car, the folder of evidence resting on the passenger seat. The town hall was only 10 minutes away, but I knew that drive would feel longer. My pulse was calm, my mind clear. And as I turned onto Main Street, I realized something. By the end of today, I wouldn't just be the woman they betrayed. I'd be the woman who ended them. The town hall was alive with chatter when I arrived. Cars packed the lot, and clusters of neighbors stood outside, bundled in coats, sipping coffee from paper cups. The building's white columns loomed ahead, the same ones I had walked past dozens of times. But this time, I wasn't just a spectator. I was the storm about to hit. Inside, the main chamber was lit bright as day. Council members shuffled papers at a long table, while reporters adjusted tripods at the back. The air buzzed with anticipation. I could already see Mark near the center aisle, all smiles and confident handshakes. Rachel hovered by the refreshments, her laughter high and hollow. They had no idea. I took a seat near the front, placing my folder neatly on the table. Beneath the folder, hidden from casual view, was a sealed envelope containing every piece of evidence: emails, bank transfers, contracts. But I wasn't going to be the only one presenting tonight. 2 rows behind me sat Detective Harris from the county sheriff's office, along with a plainclothes officer. My attorney had coordinated with them yesterday. They weren't here to watch, they were here to act. The meeting followed the usual order: budget reports, community updates. My pulse stayed steady. I heard snippets of conversation from the people behind me. Mrs. Ellis telling someone she was curious what I had to say. A man wondering aloud if this had to do with the theater sign incident. When the chair announced public comments, I rose to my feet. The room quieted instantly. "My name is Anna Carter," I began. "Some of you may think you know why I'm standing here tonight. But this isn't about gossip. This is about a crime that has been committed in our community by 2 people who use trust as their cover." A murmur swept the room. I opened my folder and pulled out the first document. Mark Carter, with the assistance of Rachel Bennett, sold confidential client data from Millbrook Mutual Insurance to an outside competitor. This is fraud. This is theft. And here is the proof. I handed copies to the council clerk, who began passing them out. Gasps and whispers filled the air as the pages circulated. I didn't stop. I explained the transactions, the meetings, the emails, each one lining up with the last until the pattern was undeniable. Then I looked toward the back of the room. "Detective Harris, these are the same documents I sent to your office earlier this week." The detective stood. "That's correct. and based on what we've reviewed, we have probable cause for arrest." The room froze. Mark's head snapped toward the detective, his face draining of color. Rachel took a step back, her hand clutching the table for balance. Harris nodded to the plainclothes officer, who stepped forward and announced, "Mark Carter, Rachel Bennett, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and theft of protected data. You have the right to remain silent." Gasps erupted from the crowd as the officers moved in. Mark stammered, "This is a mistake. Anna, tell them," but his voice broke off as the cuffs clicked shut. Rachel didn't speak. Her eyes were locked on the floor, shoulders trembling. The flash of cameras lit up the chamber as reporters shouted over each other. "Mark, did you do it? Rachel, were you paid for the data?" The officers kept moving, guiding them toward the double doors. Mrs. Ellis reached over from her seat and touched my arm gently. "You've done something that will be remembered here," she whispered. As the doors swung shut behind them, a heavy silence settled over the room. Everyone was processing what they had just seen. Some looked shocked, others almost relieved, as if a weight had been lifted from the town itself. I turned back to the podium. "This isn't just my victory," I said quietly. "It's this town's. Because when someone tries to profit by hurting others, we don't look away. We act." The applause started with a few claps in the front row, then grew louder, rolling through the chamber until it was almost deafening. I gathered my folder, sliding the remaining documents inside. As I stepped away from the podium, I caught sight of a reporter adjusting her camera toward me. "Anna?" she called. "Do you have any comment now that they've been arrested?" I paused, my hand on the back of my chair. "Only this," I said. "The truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be seen." People moved toward me, shaking my hand, thanking me. Outside, the night air felt crisp and new. Across the street, under the glow of the old theater marquee, I could see small groups forming, already retelling what had just happened. I didn't linger. I didn't need to. The image of them being led away in handcuffs would live on in every conversation, every headline, every whispered retelling. And for the first time in months, I felt the scales tip back toward justice. The morning after the town hall arrest, Millbrook woke up to a headline that would ripple far beyond our little community. "Local insurance employee and accomplice arrested for fraud. Faces up to 10 years in prison." The article was everywhere, on the county paper's website, splashed across the front page in print, even being discussed on the regional news channel. A still image from last night showed Mark in handcuffs, eyes wide and mouth half open, with Rachel behind him, her face turned away from the camera. For hours, my phone buzzed with calls and messages. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers from nearby towns thanked me for standing up. Some shared stories of how they'd lost trust in Mark years ago, or how Rachel had burned bridges long before this scandal. Others simply wrote, "You did the right thing." By noon, my attorney confirmed that the district attorney's office had officially filed charges. Bail was denied for both of them, citing risk of tampering with evidence. For the first time in a long while, I felt a steady, unshakable calm settle over me. Weeks passed, and winter melted into early spring. I focused on my own life, volunteering at the community center, taking pottery classes, walking every morning through the park. My world was no longer centered around Mark's career or Rachel's gossip. It was centered on me. Then came the trial. The courthouse was in the next county over, an old brick building with tall windows and creaking wooden floors. On the first day, the gallery was packed. Some came out of curiosity, others for closure. I sat in the second row, my attorney beside me. The prosecution's case was airtight. My documents were entered as exhibits, and I testified about how I obtained them. The IT specialist from Millbrook Mutual explained the data breaches, and a bank representative confirmed the transfers. Piece by piece, the story unfolded, not as gossip, but as undeniable fact. Mark's defense tried to argue that he was misled, that Rachel orchestrated the scheme, and he was merely caught up in it. Rachel's lawyer claimed she didn't know the data was confidential. Neither argument held up under cross-examination. On the final day, the jury filed back into the courtroom after only 3 hours of deliberation. "Guilty," the foreperson said, twice, once for each defendant. The judge's sentence was firm. 8 years in state prison for Mark, 6 for Rachel, with no possibility of early release for at least 4. Restitution was ordered to the affected clients, and a permanent ban on working in any financial or insurance industry. As the bailiffs led them away, Mark turned once toward me. There was no anger left in his eyes, just the hollow look of a man who had lost everything. I didn't smile, but I didn't look away either. Walking out of the courthouse, the air felt different. Brighter, somehow. Reporters asked if I had a statement. I kept it simple. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about restoring what was broken. Today, something in this town was repaired. Life didn't magically become perfect after that. There were still moments when the past brushed against me. Seeing an old photo tucked away in a drawer, hearing a song from the night of the gala. But those moments no longer carried the same weight. They were just echoes, fading faster each time. I planted new flowers in my garden that spring, pulling weeds with steady hands. Neighbors walking by would wave or stop to chat. The pity in their eyes was gone, replaced by something warmer. Respect. One afternoon, as I left the community center, Linda caught up to me. "You know," she said, "people are starting to believe they can speak up when something's wrong, because they saw you do it." Her words stayed with me. Maybe my victory wasn't just about holding Mark and Rachel accountable. Maybe it was about changing the way people here saw themselves, not as bystanders, but as voices worth hearing. The sun was low when I got home, casting long shadows across the lawn. I paused at the porch steps, looking back toward the street. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the next storm. I was building something steadier, something that couldn't be knocked down by anyone's betrayal. If anyone ever asks me how I survived, I'll tell them this. I didn't just survive. I rebuilt. Because women are not as fragile as some people hope we are. We are steel wrapped in patience, and when pushed far enough, we become unbreakable.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.